Oh, hello there. Yes, well, the fallout from Leeds rioting continues. Yes, some things are following a very predictable path, and other things are following a kind of new path, which I'm sure will also become pretty darned predictable. First of all, with the old, I suppose. Yes, well, after every single riot that I can think of in my life, some of which I've actually got caught up in the past, one way or another, but that's another story. Yes, what you get is whatever the government of the day is will condemn it, okay, because it's mere thuggery. It's mere thuggery. That's the immediate reaction, is mere thuggery. Yes, a sort of denial phase, if you want to go with those stages of grief thing. So, in the Telegraph, we had this report. I'll just read this as it is. Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer condemned the shocking and disgraceful disorder. Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, said those responsible should feel the full force of the law for what she described as audacious criminality. Those responsible must face the full force of the law, and the West Yorkshire Police had my support in pursuing the perpetrators and taking the strongest possible action against them. Yes, indeed. But, of course, that's what we've heard forever. I can remember the 81 riots when we were told that. I can remember the 2011 riots, 2010 riots, whatever you want. Every year there's some form of riotous behaviour which we mustn't ever try to understand. We must merely condemn it. And then people think afterwards, well, actually, that's probably quite sensible. Because if you think about it, okay, if people just simply had a propensity to riot, then they would happen a lot more often. But what they tend to be is a whole bunch of grievances which bubble up at one particular flashpoint, and that's what you get. It's usually an underlying cause, and it's very often the policing, isn't it? Think back to 81. And of course, when cooler heads prevail, you end up with people being sensible about it and making all sorts of recommendations that such things shouldn't happen again, which are conveniently ignored. So they do happen again because, well, we live in that type of society, and probably throughout most of English history we always have done. If you look at the history of, for example, the Peasants' Revolt, you can see loads and loads of different reasons why it achieved that particular flashpoint. Indeed, strange that we may have got rid of a king at that point. Anyway, I just want to highlight some of this type of thing that we get on GB News, which sort of points to the way that new things are going. So they had a roundtable discussion about 24 hours ago, and they had Paul Embry, who is for some reason always touted as a trade unionist. And okay, but I mean, he's the most reactionary. I mean, English trade unionism does tend to be pretty reactionary, but he is pretty much the most reactionary trade unionist you're ever likely to see. So yeah, he got to say about this because they're having a discussion with Michelle about what was going on. When you've got a situation like that unfolding in one of our major cities, I think you need specially trained riot police who are able to be deployed at the drop of a hat. Yes, and he says the police left local citizens to deal with the Leeds riot. Yes, indeed. But of course, certainly metropolitan areas have their own specially trained officers. Most police officers are trained at a certain level in crowd control, and they will have a bunch of people that can get into a van in a hurry and rush to where they're needed, a bit like firearms officers. So, don't really know, Paul. It might be useful if you could sort of think about things, or maybe if we just don't have this type of discussion on GB News or anywhere else between people that don't really understand anything. And talking of which, we then had Lord Daniel Moylan, who, if you don't know anything about him, he's basically one of those kind of career conservatives who start off from a nice background, shall we say, go to the inevitable posh university, Oxbridge, and come out and end up in the local and then national government via various think tanks. So he's very much your archetypal conservative. Yes, and he said none of them anticipated this because they don't know their own area. So Conservative life peer Daniel Moylan on the role the condescending middle metropolitan elite have played in sparking the Leeds riots. Yes, indeed, it's all the fault of people like me, or perhaps the Guardian newspaper, or probably Gary Lineker. Yes, because they don't understand the local area like he does. I'm sorry, but I don't think Lord Daniel does understand anything about hair heels. Again, like I said yesterday, I used to live there for a time. Prior to that, I was living in Chapeltown, and I worked there as well. And if you want to look at a brilliant history of rioting in Leeds, from a largely from a non-Muslim perspective, if you like, or group, then you can have a look at the various riots there are there. They were usually the result of very cack-handed policing, if I can put it as bluntly as that. But, of course, what we get realistically, and what we are getting increasingly, is a particular narrative about particular groups of people who don't particularly integrate, and therefore are a particular problem. Yes, with that whole kind of hierarchy of racism. Because if you look at the riots in Chapeltown, it's a very black British area, and I mean that with people there coming originally from grandparents or whatever from the Caribbean islands, okay? So you can't blame the Muslim population for that one. You couldn't blame the Muslim population for what went on in 81. You can't blame the Muslim population for really basically any riots outside of probably the occasional having a go at an author like Salman Rushdie in Bradford. Yeah? They tend to be from poorer communities, which is the whole sociology thing. You know, if you have a look at, if you want to read something, then you can read Policing the Crisis, which is probably the archetypal book to read about these kind of things. But I mean, Daniel here is perhaps right in terms of it being a media invention, but we are now developing a new media invention, which is whereby certain people aren't properly British, and even though they live in very, very depressed and poor communities, they basically need to be blamed from that. And if things do go wrong, well, then they are just being mollycoddled by people who are vaguely unidentifiable in the establishment, except of course now we have a Labour Party that you can proactively blame because they're all communist, which is kind of convenient really. I wonder what they would have had to have said about violent disorder when Struella Braverman was in charge, because after all, we all know what a hardliner she is. It's the only language that, well, she understands really, isn't it? Yes. Anyway, we will see. This kind of new narrative, the beauty of it for organisations like GB News and their associated right-wing press is you can never go too far, you see. If you decide to deport people that don't belong here, that's fine. But then you're left with a rump of people who unfortunately have British citizenship because they were born here. But then you can have a go at them as well, can't you? Yeah. And the more you tap down on them, the more alienated they'll feel, and the more likely it is that it gets to July and they start throwing bricks at the police. Plus, ça la change. Anyway, do have a lovely Sunday. Yeah. We'll see where those thunderstorms come back. Enjoy.